Friday night inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse did not feel like a basketball game. It felt like a verdict, the kind of moment where everything that has been building underneath the surface for days, for weeks, finally cracks open and spills out onto the floor in front of 18,000 people and everyone watching from home. And the woman standing at the center of all of it was not nervous, she was not cautious, she was not playing carefully or managing her emotions or trying to stay composed for the cameras. She was furious. The specific, razor-sharp, barely contained kind of furious that only the most dangerous competitors in the world know how to weaponize. And every single person inside that building was about to feel exactly what that fury looks like when it gets aimed at a basketball game. Before we get into a single possession, before we break down a single play, you need to understand the full weight of what Caitlin Clark walked into that arena carrying. Because this was not a normal Friday night game. This was the culmination of one of the most deliberately distorted, most narratively dishonest weeks of her entire career. A week where the people who were supposed to report the truth decided that clicks mattered more than facts. A week where her injury, her timeline, her professionalism, and her character all got fed into a media machine that had already decided what story it wanted to tell before a single fact had been verified. And she had watched all of it, every word, every headline, every segment. She had absorbed it the way only someone who has been through this kind of thing before knows how to absorb it, quietly, carefully, and with the kind of cold patience that should have terrified every single outlet that ran those stories. Because what comes after that kind of patience from a competitor like Caitlin Clark is never pretty for the people who earned it. She walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse on Friday night carrying a week's worth of manufactured outrage, deliberate misreporting, and the specific brand of institutional disrespect that only gets directed at people who are too significant, too undeniable, and too large to be comfortably contained. And she was about to make every single person responsible for that week regret it in the most public, most documented, most irrefutable way possible, on a basketball court, on national television, in front of everyone. The day before tip-off, Clark sat down at the press conference podium and did something that most athletes in her position would never have the clarity or the composure to do. She did not deflect, she did not smile through it. She did not offer the careful, diplomatic non-answer that publicists spend years coaching athletes to deliver in uncomfortable moments. She looked directly into those cameras, and she took the narrative apart piece by piece with the calm, methodical precision of someone who is completely done being misquoted and completely done watching dishonesty go unchallenged in public. She corrected the injury timeline, the exact, verifiable, indisputable sequence of events that the media had spent an entire week deliberately twisting into something it wasn't. She laid it out with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. She told the room that the timeline was so compressed, so brutally tight, that the entire suggestion of a cover-up wasn't just wrong, it was mathematically impossible. She said out loud that one of the most important people in her life, her own mother, found out about the decision just 40 minutes before the press did. 40 minutes. And somehow that 40-minute window had been turned into a conspiracy by people sitting in climate-controlled offices who have never in their lives made a decision under the kind of pressure that Clark operates under every single day. That was not damage control. That was not an athlete doing media management. That was a superstar serving notice. She was more visibly, genuinely angry at that podium than she has been at any press conference this entire season, and we all saw it. Every single person watching that press conference saw the same thing. This was not manufactured, this was not performed for cameras or calculated for sympathy. This was real, barely contained, completely righteous fury from a woman who has spent years watching the truth get stretched and bent and reframed in real time while being expected to stay silent and smile through it. The outlets that ran those false stories saw that press conference too. They had access to every second of it. They just chose to hope that the news cycle would move fast enough that you would forget about it before tip-off, that you would get distracted by the next story, the next headline, the next manufactured controversy, and let the original lie quietly dissolve into the background without anyone being held accountable for it. That is how this works. That is the machine. And that is exactly why what happened inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse the very next night mattered as much as it did, because Clark did not let anyone forget. She went out onto that floor and she made sure that forgetting was not an option.
To understand what happened in the first half of this game, you need to understand the specific kind of physical pressure that Golden State's defensive scheme was built around. This was not a casual, figure-it-out-as-you-go defensive game plan. Natalie Nakase does not do casual. She does not walk into a game against Caitlin Clark without a precise, detailed, film-studied blueprint for how to make the night as difficult as possible. And what that blueprint called for on Friday night was physical. Deliberately, strategically, relentlessly physical. The kind of defensive pressure designed not just to limit Clark's production, but to drain her mentally. To make every catch uncomfortable, every drive contested, every movement through the paint a confrontation, to chip away at her until the weight of it accumulated into frustration, into hesitation, into the kind of subtle self-protection that changes how a player attacks. It did not work, but it did produce the moment that completely changed the temperature of this game. Late in the first half, Clark put her head down and went hard after a loose ball. Contact happened. The kind of contact that happens at the end of a first half where both teams are already operating at a heightened physical intensity. Valkyrie's forward Janelle Salon did not just take exception to the contact, she stepped directly into Clark's space and made it unmistakably personal. These two were jawing at each other with the specific kind of intensity that makes assistant coaches instinctively start moving toward the sideline. And that is exactly what happened next. Both benches started creeping toward the floor. Veronica Burton physically inserted herself between them to keep the situation from escalating into something that cost someone more than a technical foul. The officials had seen enough. They handed out double technicals, one to Clark, one to Salon. Both teams walked into that locker room carrying a halftime energy that felt less like a break and more like a pressure cooker being sealed shut. The mainstream media is not sitting down to examine what that double technical actually meant for the second half of this basketball game. Nobody is doing that work. Nobody is connecting the dots between that confrontation and what came out of Clark in the third quarter. That is exactly why we are here. Here is what you need to understand about the psychology of a competitor built the way Caitlin Clark is built. She does not start cheap confrontations. She does not go looking for petty conflicts in the middle of a basketball game. That is not who she is, and it has never been who she is. What she does, what she has always done, is absorb everything the game throws at her and convert it. Every foul, every cheap shot, every dishonest headline, every minute of manufactured doubt. She takes all of it in and she processes it and she walks back out onto the floor and she turns it into something the people responsible for it deeply regret. That altercation with Salon did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the end of the most exhausting, most narratively distorted, most emotionally draining week of the entire season. A week where her back injury got weaponized by people sitting in press row who would not recognize competitive pain if it walked up and introduced itself. The tactical fouling, the media circus, the public questioning of her toughness and her health and her professionalism, all of it had been compressing inside her for days, like a spring being wound tighter and tighter. That confrontation with Salon was not a distraction from Clark's game. It was the final ingredient. You do not grind down a competitor built like Caitlin Clark. You do not wear her into submission with cheap fouls and poisonous headlines and strategic disrespect. All you do when you try that is give her a reason. And on Friday night, she had approximately 17 of them stacked directly on top of each other. She walked out of that locker room for the third quarter, and she went somewhere mentally that very few players in the history of this league have ever been able to access on purpose. The moment itself was not complicated. It did not require a complex read of the defense, or a series of screens, or a carefully manufactured mismatch. She brought the ball up the floor, did not hesitate, did not look for a play call, did not probe the coverage looking for the safe option. She walked directly to the logo, 33 feet from the basket, and she pulled up. Tie game, 48 apiece. Home crowd in front of her, after a double technical, After a week of media garbage that would have rattled a less grounded player into playing small and safe, after days of people publicly questioning whether she was even healthy enough to be on the floor, she stepped to the logo and knocked it down like she was alone in a gym at midnight, like the basket was the only thing in the building, like there was not a single thing that had happened in the previous 7 days that could touch her in that moment.
And then she did the thing that tells you everything you actually need to know about who Caitlin Clark is when she is fully locked in. She did not quietly jog back on defense. She did not keep her composure in the careful, camera-aware way that image consultants would have advised. She turned to Valkyrie's veteran guard Tiffany Hayes, stepped directly into her space, and talked her trash with the cold, completely composed confidence of someone who knows precisely where they stand in the competitive hierarchy and has absolutely no interest in pretending otherwise. Hayes gave it right back. Of course she did. She is a seasoned, battle-tested player who has been in big moments before. But the crowd inside Gainsbridge Fieldhouse erupted in the kind of noise that cuts straight through you, the kind of noise that reminds you why live sports, contested, physical, emotionally raw sports, matter in a way that nothing else quite replicates. What we witnessed in that sequence was not just a big shot in a regular season game, it was an on-court exorcism. Every cheap foul absorbed, every dishonest headline, every minute of manufactured doubt about her health, her toughness, her character. She pulled every piece of that toxic, accumulated weight into her body, and she turned it into a Logo 3 and ice-cold trash talk directed at a legitimate all-star. That is not something you coach. That is not something you develop through repetition and practice. That is a competitive identity that either exists inside a person at their core or it does not. And in Caitlin Clark, it exists at a level that this league has not seen in a very long time. The head coach of the Indiana Fever saw it from the sideline in real time and said exactly what needed to be said about it afterward. She is an emotional player, and it is one of the things that makes her great. She channeled it in a way that needed to be channeled for the team to be successful. She handled it. That is not a complicated coaching observation. That is a precise description of what separates the good competitors from the truly special ones. The ability to take the rawest, most uncontrollable emotional energy and direct it with surgical precision towards something productive. Clark does that better than almost anyone playing basketball right now at any level. Now let's talk about what the box score says, what it doesn't say, and why the gap between those two things is where the real story of Friday night actually lives. 22 points, 9 assists, 4 made threes on 9 attempts, 32 minutes. Read those numbers slowly and let them land properly, because taken together, they represent something that goes well beyond a strong individual performance. 9 assists in 32 minutes against a defensive scheme specifically engineered to limit her ability to create for others. 4 threes on 9 attempts against a team that knew exactly what she was going to do and spent an entire week preparing to take it away from her. 22 points not accumulated through soft mid-range shots against a collapsing defense, but earned through a series of decisions made at full speed against a legitimate, well-coached, physically aggressive defensive unit that had a specific answer prepared for nearly everything she tried. That is not a skill set than shooting. That is a different level of basketball intelligence than athleticism or physical talent can explain. That is a player operating on a frequency that most people watching the game, including a significant percentage of the analysts paid to explain it, are not fully equipped to process in real time. Here is what actually happens to the Indiana Fever as a team when Clark is running at this level of ball-dominant efficiency. The entire ecosystem transforms, not slightly, not marginally, completely. The spacing opens up in ways that create opportunities that simply do not exist when she is managing her effort or playing through discomfort. The pace accelerates to a tempo that punishes teams who are not exceptionally well-conditioned and exceptionally disciplined in transition. The decision-making sharpens across the entire roster because when you know the ball is going to arrive exactly where you need it, exactly when you need it, you can read and react instead of waiting and guessing.
This team becomes something opponents genuinely fear when Clark is at full power, and nobody demonstrated that more completely on Friday night than Aliyah Boston.
What Boston did in this game deserves a full, serious, unhurried conversation, because the numbers are one thing. 16 rebounds, 20 points, 8 of 15 from the field, a complete, dominant, wire-to-wire ownership of the painted area from the opening tip to the final buzzer. Those numbers are impressive on their own, but they do not capture what was actually happening out there. They do not tell you about the quality of the positioning, the timing of the cuts, the discipline of the post work, the way she repeatedly put herself in exactly the right spot at exactly the right moment and then made the right decision with the ball every single time it arrived. This was not a loud, hyped performance. Boston did not have the broadcast crew losing their minds after every bucket. She did not have a single highlight that went viral or a moment that dominated the post-game conversation the way Clark's Logo 3 did. What she had was something quieter and, in its own way, more impressive. She had the kind of sustained, methodical, positional dominance that only shows up when a player is being fed perfectly, when every pass is arriving in rhythm, in stride, at the exact spot that eliminates the need for adjustment before the move. That kind of performance does not happen by accident. It does not happen because Boston woke up on Friday morning and decided to have the best game of her season. It happens because the person running the offense is reading the defense accurately enough, quickly enough, and with enough precision to find Boston at exactly the right moment every single time all night long. Boston has always had this talent. She has always had the physical tools and the basketball IQ to operate at this level. What unlocks her completely, what elevates her from very good to genuinely elite, is Clark finding her in the moments and the spots where she can do maximum damage. When that connection is operating at full capacity, this Indiana Fever team is not a feel-good story. This Indiana Fever team is a legitimate championship-caliber threat. Full stop. No qualifications, no asterisks. A team built around that Clark to Boston connection, operating at peak efficiency, is a team that can compete with anyone in this league and beat anyone in this league on the right night. Friday night was the right night, and it showed everyone exactly what that ceiling actually looks like when it gets reached. But here is the part of this story that matters more than any individual statistic or any single moment of highlight basketball. Here is the part that eliminates any remaining room for debate about what Clark actually is and what she actually does to a basketball game at her best. Because we do not have to make this argument ourselves. The opposing head coach made it for us, on the record, at the post-game podium in front of everyone. Natalie Nakase is not a background figure. She is not some underqualified first-time head coach who stumbled into this position without the credentials to back it up. This is a woman with a resume that includes time as an assistant with the Golden State Warriors at the NBA level. She has studied film the way serious people study it, obsessively, relentlessly, looking for every edge and every answer before the game starts. She prepares with a level of meticulousness that her own players will describe in private as borderline intense, and she coaches with precision, real, earned, film-backed precision that comes from actually doing the work at the highest level of the sport. After watching her team absorb a 90-82 loss on Friday night, she stood at that podium and she told the truth. She publicly acknowledged that Clark made adjustments her scheme was never designed to handle, that Clark identified the exact windows in the coverage where the plan broke down, that passes threading through gaps that should not have existed caught her team completely off guard in moments where there was simply no recovery available in time. That admission means everything, not because it is surprising that Clark made a prepared defensive scheme look inadequate, but because of who is saying it and what it actually confirms about the specific nature of Clark's basketball intelligence. You can build a defensive plan around a left side step back. You can study the Logo 3 and make a calculated decision about how much you are willing to concede on it versus how much defensive energy you are willing to commit to taking it away. You can chart tendencies, identify patterns, prepare your personnel for the situations most likely to arise.
All of that preparation is real, and it matters, and coaches like Nas do it better than almost anyone in this league.
But what you cannot scheme against, what no defensive coordinator in the WNBA has found a consistent answer for, is a player who reads your coverage in real time, identifies precisely where it is breaking down, and executes the right pass or the right shot into that window before the rotation can close it. That is not athleticism. That is not shooting touch or footwork or any of the physical qualities that coaches can study on film and prepare specific counters for. That is a basketball intelligence operating at a speed and a frequency that simply cannot be neutralized through preparation alone. You either respect it completely and accept the limitations that come with that respect, or you get exposed on national television. On Friday night, a brilliantly prepared coaching staff chose wrong, and the scoreboard made sure that absolutely everyone knew it. The Indiana Fever are now 4-2. Clark is fully healthy. She is angry in the most productive, most focused way a competitor can be angry. Boston just delivered the best individual performance of her season and did it in a game that mattered, on a stage that was being watched nationally. The momentum is not a talking point being manufactured by a fan base looking for reasons to feel good. It is a documented, undeniable, directional fact. This team is moving forward, fast. And this is the version of Caitlin Clark that the entire league has been quietly dreading since the season started. Not the managed minutes version, working her way back from a back issue. Not the cautious, energy-conserving version that smart coaches deploy to protect their players through the early weeks of a long season. The angry version, the locked-in version, the trash-talking, logo-bombing, team-elevating, defensive scheme-shredding apex version of Caitlin Clark. The one who absorbs a full week of flagrant physical punishment and petty institutional politics and responds by taking over a nationally televised basketball game with the calm, cold composure of someone who was never even slightly in doubt about how this was going to end. Every executive who looked the other way when the cheap shots were landing, every reporter who took a verifiable timeline and bent it into a conspiracy for engagement, every defensive specialist who spent this week studying film and told themselves that they had finally figured out how to contain her. Friday night was Clark's direct, unambiguous, undeniable answer to every single one of them, delivered on the floor, in front of everyone, in the language that matters most in this sport. And the part that should genuinely concern every team in this league, the part that should keep defensive coordinators up at night in ways that no amount of film study is going to resolve, is that she is just getting started. This is the beginning of what Clark looks like when she is healthy, motivated, and operating with the particular kind of focused rage that only comes from being publicly disrespected by people who should have known better. The Fever are building. Boston is locked in. The connection between them is operating at a level that creates problems no single defensive scheme has the answer for. And the woman running this offense just spent an entire week being handed reasons to be the most dangerous version of herself. The league was warned. The media was warned. The critics were warned. Friday night was not the warning. Friday night was the consequence. What comes next is something else entirely. And if you are not paying close attention right now, you are going to miss the most important stretch of basketball this league has produced in years. This is not a moment to look away. This is the moment to lock in completely. Because what is coming is going to be worth every second of attention you give it.